wrap up the elimination round of the Governor's Cup.
And we'll hear some stories from the sidelines of PVL All-Filipino Conference. Buckle up, sports fans. Let's get in the game. It's been really quick, but we are now down to the last game day before we head on over to the PBA Governor's Cup playoffs. Now, to tell us what is at stake for the teams tomorrow, we have with us basketball analyst Coach Jeff Carriazo. Coach Jeff, how are you doing?
Good.
Hey,
good.
Coach.
Always nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Pao, Diego.
You know, Coach, we love you here all the time because you give us a lot of insight that, typically I would save for nerdier analysts, and I love the fact we can have these types of conversations. Let's take a look at the standings first here, because right now San Miguel Beer and Rain or Shine will be one of the games that we'll be featuring, and Rain or Shine already eliminated from the contest. But then for San Miguel, interesting thing here, they still have a shot at the number 1 seed, but it still feels like they're still trying to figure things out, especially without a Junmar Fajardo in contention.
Well, if they played the way they played last night, I think they really have a good chance. They're content and happy where they are, whether it's 1, 2, or 3. But again, a San Miguel team, regardless of Junmar, is still a very strong team.
I mean, one of the very stacked teams here in the PBA, Coach. But let's talk a bit about Rain or Shine. They're out of playoff contention already, Coach. And you've experienced both being out of the playoff contention as a coach, but also contending as being one of the top teams. Can you take us through what you have to say to these players, how to motivate them, knowing that you're not going to make it to the playoffs, but you still got to do your best against a team like SMB?
Well, at the end of the day, I think, we're all professionals. So, regardless if there's 1 game, 10 games left, you always want to play every game the same way, the right way. And then you want to end this conference on a good note. It may be a small thing, but at the end of the day, hey, you have an opportunity for a small bonus. Why not go get it?
Right.
So, this young team, I think, and they have been playing well regardless of the fact that there's no import.
Yeah.
So, I think you're going to see them working hard tomorrow and giving their best and trying to win.
Yeah, I want to bring that up actually, because they had to play all Filipino because of the import situation for a few games. In fact, some may argue if they had an import in some of those games, they might have actually made it to the playoffs. You take a look at it, if you're Coach Yang Yao and all of a sudden you have players who are young and suddenly given this opportunity to develop in a way that they probably wouldn't have gotten if they had an import, if they had a reinforcement. And is that a silver lining for those guys? And is that a silver lining for Coach Yang Yao that he now knows more about some of the young guys he has now?
That's a very good point. I really think it is a silver lining, and these guys are getting opportunities that they may not have gotten. So yes, they go through the import situation. There's a problem here and there. It happens, but what do you do then? What do you do now to grow and develop? Play your young guys. So that's what I'm excited about. There's a lot of young guys on that team. I think they're pretty solid across the board.
Yeah.
They're just lacking a little bit more experience and just a little bit more time with coaching.
Right. I mean, talking about young guys who's stepping up right now. I mean, Pao mentioned earlier that Junmar will be out for a couple of weeks for SMB. I mean, that's what the reports say. But CJ Perez, you mentioned you're going to be mentioning, Coach. How important is he for SMB to make it, far in the playoffs?
Right. I think his consistency is really proof on why they do so well.
Yeah.
So CJ is really their top guard, amongst all the wonderful, great players that they have there. What's really impressive, and I saw this firsthand last night, versus NLEX is, gosh, they play well together and everyone understands the role.
Right.
And whether you're coming off the bench, whether if you're Alin Bulanadi or if you're gosh, Romeo played a little bit last night.
Yeah, he did. I was going to mention.
But there's so many weapons on that team, and with an import like Cameron Clark, gosh, anything is possible for that San Miguel Ball Club.
Well, leading the charge for Rain or Shine is Rain Ambatak, 14.2 points per game, 2 rebounds, and 3.9 assists. And you can only imagine just how much more he'll improve in the next conference. But let's move on here first to the TNT and Barangay Ginebra matchup. A lot of people might have said that this matchup probably could have decided a lot more had the standings been a lot tighter. But then you take a look at these two. TNT, it feels like they haven't gotten their full flow yet. Barangay Ginebra still have a lot of injuries to deal with, and they're trying to work out again. Still no Japet Aguilar for them. You take a look at these two teams, not at their full strength, but still, in your mind, title contenders for sure?
Very much so. So, you say that about the two teams, but I really think obviously they are the top two teams. Top three, you include San Miguel. And, they're strong because, again, they're familiar with each other. They played together for a long time, and they both have really good imports.
Well, if you talk about TNT, they're basically a lock for the #1 spot, except if Ginebra wins and Rain or Shine wins.
Yeah.
And that's the only way they would give up that #1 spot.
Right.
But, Coach, they have only lost one game so far here in this conference. What's going right for them? What are you seeing? You've been covering the games, Coach.
Yeah, first of all, with this last play date, they do have, out of the 4 scenarios left, Talking Tech does have 3 to be #1. So that's exactly right. Why Talking Tech is doing so well, in my opinion, is because they went from being good now to very good with the change of import in Rondé Hollis Jefferson. So he's really brought them to another level. But you cannot disregard or discount the locals. Right?
Yeah.
Why I like their team is because they're balanced. They're balanced across the board. They know who their scorers are. Our Pogoy, Mikey Williams, they're going to do their thing. And then you have your veteran guys that are playing the role players, Jason and Kelly Williams.
Right.
And then the young guys. Don't disregard the young guys who play D and who are pests, with doing the little things like Tungkab and Barilla, who they recently got, and then Montalvo. So I say they're complete, and Coach George is doing a great job so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to mention Kelly Williams. I was going to ask if he was your batchmate, but I think maybe not. But,
No,
They played against each other.
But
yeah, they played against each other.
Butan niya ako, that's for sure. That's for sure.
all right. But Jamie Malonzo, now moving on to the other side, it felt that ever since that Game 7 against the Bay Area Dragons, he just went from strength to strength. He just showed us that it wasn't a fluke, that type of performance, because he has been producing more consistently this time around. What's changed in his game, in your opinion?
Just, the experience. And I think having more games under his belt as a pro, having more games under his belt with Coach Tim and this Ginebra team, he looks very comfortable, and we can only expect him just to get better each and every game. And he's showing it. And I'm really happy for him because he's not just doing it on the offensive end. He's understanding that there's a need, especially with your coach Tim, there's a need to play on the defensive side.
Yeah.
And he's also doing that.
Right. I mean, Jamie averaging 17 points, 7 rebounds, and almost 3 assists per game, doing a little bit of everything for this Ginebra team. But for Ginebra, they've only had 2 losses so far, Coach. As a team, I mean, Jamie Malonzo for sure has an effect, but as a team, what are they doing right this conference as well, Coach?
Well, I will say first and foremost that the guy who's stepping up big time for them this conference is C-Stan. Just playing great, understanding that they need a big guy present, the presence of a big guy without Japit there, and he's actually doing well. He's playing, I think, and coming off a really good performance in the finals. But again, another team that's well balanced, well coached, and that's why they're top 3.
It's surprising considering the fact that no Japet Aguilar, no LA Tenorio for this Barangay Ginebra team, and they're still flying as high as they are. But you take a look at this matchup here for TNT and Barangay Ginebra. Is there still another level for them, especially when you get into the playoffs? Because we all know how ruthless they could be.
Right.
But then with all of the ups and downs of the conference so far, do you feel that that next level is attainable for them?
Well, I think for you to be able to be successful in the playoff is you do have that next level. So do they? I think they do. Aside from the experience of, again, being in those positions and playing in big games like that, I think these guys know when to step on the gas even more.
Yeah.
And, that's why it's going to be an exciting playoffs for the PBA this conference.
Coach Jeff, I can't wait to hear you call the playoff basketball because
gonna
it's
be
so
very
fun.
exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun. Really appreciate you coming on over.
No problem. Looking
Thank you,
forward to
Coach.
it. Thank you.
And after the break, we'll get the inside scoop on some courtside stories in the PVL All-Filipino Conference. Stay tuned. You're watching The Game. Welcome back. You're watching the game. The PVL is just about to wrap up its eliminations round. That means we're moments away from the postseason.
Literal moments away.
Moments away, literally.
Oo.
Now, before all the chaos that comes with the semis, let's take a quick breather and listen to some light-hearted stories. And joining us to give some behind the scenes, fresh from the Phil Sports Arena. Of course, we talked about rain or shine. Now we're talking about PVL Courtside reporter Rain Tixon. You like that, Pao?
I like that. I'm so
Okay.
impressed.
All right, Rain.
goodness.
I mean, you came straight from the games, so let's talk about some of the teams here in the PVL. Let's talk about playoff teams first. And one player from F2, Ara Galang. What can you say about her for us?
Yeah, I'm sure, Diego, you would know this, that injuries really change the way that a player moves, the way that a player gets to execute. And that's why Ara Galang really felt like she had to relearn how to play volleyball, because in the collegiate ranks, she had an ACL injury, and then in the pros, she had a shoulder injury. So parang nag-iba yung galaw niya because it's injuries for both both extremities,
Right.
kumbaga.
Upper and lower, right?
Exactly, which is why parang she felt na she had to change the way that she plays. So if you remember, in her DLSU days, she was such an offensive threat. As in, siya yung pumupuntos para sa DLSU. But here in the F2 Logistics Cargo Movers, Ara has been an all-around player. As in, when she's on the floor, it's like you have two liberos,
Right.
which is a real big boost, especially since, KKD is playing so well,
Yeah.
Myla Pablo, even Ivy is starting to find her groove. So having that floor defense really helps the case of F2 Logistics.
Just looking at all of that, we always talk about the physical aspect of the injuries. And you mentioned a while ago, she needed to adapt, change the way she played, relearn how to play volleyball. But then mentally, do you have anything on that? Because that is probably the most unseen thing that athletes go through the most.
Yeah, so Ara actually doesn't like watching too much of her plays from college, and she wants to focus talaga on being an all-around player. Kasi nga, her body has changed, and so many players in the pros also have this same situation. And Ara wants to focus more on moving forward instead of focusing on the past, because she is a completely different player. And the Ara Galang we know is not the Ara Galang of 5-10 years
Right.
ago.
So in other words, move on.
Yes,
Basically,
move on.
And let's move on from this.
Okay, let's move on to the next team in the playoffs as well, the Petrogaz Angels. And you got to talk to Mommy Chi Saet. I mean, we just had her on the show also. I mean, they've been to the playoffs a couple of times, very consistent.
Yes.
But what's different this time around?
So Mommy Chi, when I got to talk to her, this was their game before Akari. So at this point, hindi pa sila pumapasok sa semis.
Yeah.
And what she told me was that Petrogas wants to get into the semis on their own merit. Hindi yung, kunyari, may na-injure na other team, or for example, another team started having bad streaks. They
Right.
want to make it because they are actual contenders. And Mommy Chi told me that it was such a big mindset going into the Akari game and into even the game against Cherry Tigo, na talagang ilalaban nila hanggang dulo to prove that they have a spot in the semis and they deserve it.
Yeah, the fighting for what they deserve, syempre, it's such a motivation. But
course.
then another thing that when you talk about mindset and we talk about the most cliche words in sports, cultura.
Cultura.
Culture. And there you had an interview with Kyle Atienza regarding Creamline's culture.
Yes.
And that is very tangible. What did you find out?
In Creamline kasi, if you notice, they really continue the happy, heart strong kind of culture. And this is really swak na swak si Kyla Atienza dito. Kasi Kyla is a libero, so she doesn't really see her statistics coming out on paper. But whenever she gets motivation or whenever she gets feedback from her other teammates, that's really what boosts her. And she's had so much experience playing with international players, both in the ASEAN Grand Prix as well as the Reinforced Conference. But these little things, the everyday, kakausapin niya si Ate Gia, kakausapin niya yung mga teammates niya, it's something that she has embraced and she has flourished, as we see now in the All-Filipino Conference.
Well, from the top of the standings, Creamline, let's talk about a team who's looking for their first win this conference, and of course, they still have that chance. I mean, Army Black Mamba, I think they're playing right now.
Yeah, at the moment. Kaya
at the moment.
sabi natin moments away from the semi.
Right. I mean, what do you have for Army Black Mamba as they go on to this last game of the elimination round?
So Diego, you mentioned it. Now Army is still trying to look for that win, and this was the same case in the reinforced conference. They weren't able to get a win all throughout the conference. So talagang deflated, medyo mabigat yung loob ng Army. But that was when one of the generals, General Ginid, if I'm not mistaken, talked to the team and tried to motivate them, but in a very specific way. He reminded the team that they're playing for a certain bigger responsibility.
right.
Because Army Black Mamba Energy Drink, they are also representing the actual army, the soldiers who are fighting in the front lines. And these soldiers, whenever they see yung mga players daw, sobrang tumataas yung loob nila because it's not just, you know, a team that's trying to win a championship. They are literally humanizing the army. They're representing army and they're making them very tangible. Parang they're people like us. And this is why it's so important for Army to try to get at least one win, not just for themselves, but also for the organization they represent.
You know, it's a lot of great stories here, Rain, and of course, there's a lot more to come. But right before we go on and move on with the show, syempre, because we have extra time, kamusta ka naman? How has that experience been being here? Because you've been telling stories in sports for a very long time, throughout your very young career. But at the same time, this is the first time you've actually done something like this. Biggest realization so far now that we're getting into the business end of the PVL.
Yeah, so I think the PVL has really grown conference by conference. It can be little things like a smaller franchise team getting a certain fan base, or it can be as large as the sport itself growing and getting recognition internationally. I mean, we just had the VNL here in the Philippines. So talagang volleyball is such a lucrative sport. It's a sport that has so much growth into it, and I think this is just gonna keep going on. I mean, that's the pattern with volleyball now. Talagang Filipino fans are getting so into it, and ako, I love telling the stories of these volleyball players, especially the ones na kailangan kilalanin pa ng mga fans natin.
Absolutely. Rain, you're doing a great job, and of course, those were stories for a rainy day with Rain
Oh my God.
I knew it. I knew it was coming. I knew
Maraming
it.
salamat,
Thank
Rain,
you, Rain.
and we'll see you at the rest of the games.
Thank you, guys.
After the break, we'll hear from NBA Deputy Commissioner Mark Tatum as he talks about the NBA talent competing at the upcoming FIBA Basketball World Cup 2023. Stay tuned. You're watching The Game.
Welcome back, you're watching The Game. With the FIBA Basketball World Cup on the horizon, Boom Gonzalez spoke to the NBA Deputy Commissioner Mark Tatum about the league's world-class talent coming to Manila.
I'm from the Philippines. I had the honor of hosting you there when you were there. I'm from Signal TV, and you mentioned about the international players. I would like to ask for advice, actually, because we're hosting the World Cup also.
I'll be
this
there.
year.
Yes.
And I believe 56 players from the NBA have committed to their national teams, respective national teams.
And we'll have more than that.
There you go.
Yes.
And I guess from a country standpoint, what would be your advice for us in terms of having all of these NBA superstars in a basketball crazy country like the Philippines? And from a broadcasting standpoint, since Signal TV is a partner of the NBA and we're covering the World Cup, what do you think is your advice in terms of like media coverage and just concentration on these NBA players coming over?
The Philippines is going to be incredible. I mean, it is one of our highest affinity markets that we have in the world in terms of the population that loves the game of basketball. So there are so many pure basketball fans there. And I know that because I sit on the FIBA Executive Committee and Central Board, so we get regular updates on the progress. The facilities are being built and are going to be great. I think the experience for the players is going to be terrific. The USA team is going to spend the entire time playing in the Philippines. But there will be, as you said, at least 60, probably more, NBA players that are going to be participating, and obviously in Japan and Indonesia as well. I would say that for the media, for the fans, they're gonna. It's a unique experience to see. We just saw the World Cup of football, obviously take place. It's a unique opportunity to bring the world together. And I think we look at that at the World Cup of football and we say, okay, what can we learn from that? And I think telling the stories of the players, of the teams themselves, being able to pick out those stories and talk about how these teams got to representing their countries in this global competition. And I think the level of competition is going to be very, very competitive because you now have the Canadian team that has the potential to stack 12 NBA players on their national team. You have the French team, you have the Australian team, you have the Spanish team, the Greek team. All these teams are going to be stacked with NBA players, with Luka in Slovenia and Jokic in Serbia. I mean, it's going to be a competitive basketball competition with the flair of the national interest behind it. Again, all those players play in our league, so we have the fortune of having that every night in our league. But when you add that playing for your national team, that creates another level of interest around these teams. So my advice would be tell the stories. Tell the great, passionate stories of these players who have worked so hard all their lives to get to where they've gotten, to represent their country in the one of the most significant basketball competitions in the world. And they take it seriously. They want to win. These players are competitors, and they look forward to competing and winning that World Cup.
That was NBA Deputy Commissioner Mark Tatum with Boom Gonzalez. Thank you for joining us. I'm Diego Dario.
Catch us weeknights here on One News, One Sports, and One Sports Plus. I'm Paolo Del Rosario, and this has been The Game.